Alright guys, on the top of your paper, please write Social Studies, 8th, 10.5, for Lesson 5, Unit 10. Today we're just going to continue our studies on the Battle of Equality with African Americans and after the slave trade and everything of that nature. As always, with the yellow highlighted, please write these down as these will be the answer to the question, so please follow along. Starting with the first vocabulary word, what is to prevent something from happening? That is to deter. And then continuing on, we have the other ones, but then we have the other one, which is a person who believes that a white race is better than the other white is a white supremacist. Going into the first paragraph, we're going to talk about the Freedoms Bureau. General O. Howard believed that the state governments were intent to keeping the blacks in the states of servitude. He was determined to ignore the black codes and do what he believed was morally right for blacks. These views brought him into conflict with the state government of the South, but since the Freedoms Bureau was part of the military, he did not let this deter him. Because the views of General Howard reflected those of the radical Republicans, these congressional leaders saw the Freedom Bureaus as a way to influence the blacks politically. Thaddeus Stevens and other radical Republicans wanted the full citizenship for the blacks. They wanted true equality between the races. However, most people in the United States did not share this view. Most whites, even in the North, did not believe that blacks were equal with whites and did not want the blacks to have the same rights and privileges. It is obvious that Southern whites did not want black to vote. Therefore, conflict was bound to happen. After the election of 1866, Congress had to vote to pass anything over the president's veto. They took complete control of the Reconstruction process. They passed the 14th Amendment and required the Southern states to ratify it before they could readmit it to the Union. President Johnson could not keep the 14th Amendment from being passed in Congress. However, he knew that without the support of the Southern states, the amendment would not be ratified. Therefore, he urged the Southern legislature to vote against it. 10 states voted against it, and the amendment's ratification stalled. So now in this section, we're going to talk about the 1876 and these 1867 and 1868 Reconstruction Acts. Republican congressional leaders were extremely angry at the Southern state governments for their refusal to ratify the amendment. They were also unhappy that the states had passed the black codes and were opposing the efforts of the Freedom Bureau. They passed a series of acts that became known as the Reconstruction Acts of 1867 and 1868. The Reconstruction Acts were extremely harsh. Looking back, it was hard to believe that the Congress would undo everything they had already done by going back at the beginning of the Reconstruction. However, this is exactly what happened. The states' government were disbanded. The territory of the former Confederacy was divided into 5 military districts. Former Confederate soldiers were de-enfranchised, meaning their right to vote was taken away. The former states were counted as conquered enemy territory, not as states. Of course, all of these acts were vetoed by the President Johnson. They passed over his vetoes. And right here, these are the districts that were not considered states at the time. You have Arkansas, Mississippi, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, and Texas and Louisiana, and they were all during this period of the Reconstruction of 1867. Each military district were under the control of a major general. Troops were moved in to occupy the districts, keep the peace, and provide government. The major general had the responsibility of deciding who could vote and create a list of approved voters. Then, the voters would elect delegates to the state's convention, where the states would create a new constitution. The state's constitution would be required to provide for the black suffrage. New states' governments would be formed, and these new governments would be required to ratify the 4th Amendment. The Reconstruction Act and the military district they created were in desperate acts of the radicals. The radicals believed that President Johnson was too lenient. However, they understood that their actions might be viewed as unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. The Constitution was pretty clear of the issue. No parts of the United States could be placed under military rule once civil courts and governments has been established. The Supreme Court ruled Ex parte Milligan, 1866, that was imposing military rule after the courts are reinstated. It is a gross usurpation of power. To show the extent of the power of Congress had grown out of bounds, the Congress passed a law stating that the Supreme Court did not have jurisdiction in this case. As Commander-in-Chief, President Johnson had been able to keep his major generals from assuming their roles as military governors. However, his loss of power has been so great that the generals answered directly to Congress. Over the 10 years from 1866 to 1876, the states under military rule satisfied the conditions set forth by Congress and were readmitted to the Union. Most former Confederates would also receive amnesty and would be allowed to vote or hold office. However, it would be a long road and the fight between the President and Congress was far from over. President Johnson was not content to just lie back and let Congress punish the southern states. And over here we have the Ku Klux Klan, which, as the blacks gained civil rights during the 1860s and 1870s, some of the whites were opposed to their suffrage. In many states, white terrorist organizations were formed to intimidate the blacks and keep them from voting. Even after the 15th Amendment guaranteed blacks the right to vote, hooded mob terrorized them and threatened them with death to keep them from exercising this right. These organizations had names such as Southern Cross, the Knights of the White Camellia, and the Ku Klux Klan. The best known of these organizations is the Ku Klux Klan, and was formed by ex-Confederates in the winters of 1865 and 1866. The name just means a circle of brothers. In these early days, the Klan did not have national organization, just a set of local groups. Each Klan organized its copycat groups in other places. The KKK was known for their intimidation of blacks through threats and actual violence. In hooded robes, they rode in groups in the night, burning crosses in front of the lawns of the black homes and churches. In many cases, they actually hanged blacks and sympathetic whites. So that is pretty much it for this section. Thank you guys for tuning in.